I know some of you are joining by video, and I don't have to do this very often, but I do have to put a caveat and a warning onto this message. We have already sent our children out, and so if you are joining us by video, by way of warning, this will not be a very family-friendly sermon. So just to give you that heads up before we begin. And with that, I probably have a lot of your attention out here like, wait, what? It was interesting. We have been looking at one crazy family. And last week, Pastor Jimmy informed me that he would not be here this week. And he happened to say, well, have you chosen something to preach on? I said, well, actually, I just got your email this morning. So no, I really haven't thought. He's like, well, I haven't covered Jacob's children. Would you like to cover Jacob's children? I said, I would love to cover Jacob's children. Now, I don't know how many of you know anything about Jacob's children, and I'm going to guess this is going to be new for a lot of you because these are not the stories that they tell you in Sunday school, okay? So we're probably going to go places that you're going to be like, oh, wow, that's in there? One crazy family. By way of introduction to this, and I'm going to go quickly this morning. Don't worry, I'm not going to preach till 11:30. You're good. So it's not going to be long, but we're going to cover a lot of material. We know that Jacob is a descendant of Abraham, and we've kind of established that. But there's a few things that I need to make sure that you understand. Abraham was called by God from the city of Ur, which is in modern-day Iraq. And Abraham and his wife Sarai traveled to what is now the land of Israel. And God's promise was if he would leave his land and travel to where God would show him, aka the land of Israel, that he would make of him a great nation. And Abraham and Sarah, being married, did not have any children. Now, God had promised a child, and Abraham's faith lapses just a little bit, and Sarah's, and they decide to try to do things their own way. God promised they were going to have a child, but they're like, yeah, this isn't happening. And so Abraham ends up taking his wife's servant and having a child with her. Okay. Now, I will tell you, that does not work out well. Not only did that become very divisive in that family, with that servant and the child, Ishmael, actually being thrown out of the family and exiled. But even today, scholars attribute this to kind of the beginnings of the tensions that we see boiling over in the Middle East today. Well, Abraham and Sarah will have a child, Isaac. When Isaac gets to marrying age, Abraham is very concerned that he does not intermarry with the people in the land of Israel. Remember, Abraham is from Ur. He is in Israel. He never settles down. He travels as a nomad all his life. But he wanted to make sure, because the people of the land of Israel at that time, the Canaanites, were very wicked. And it was very important to Abraham that his son Isaac have a wife from his own kin. So he sends his servant back to his homeland, and through a great and awesome story that we don't have time to go through, Isaac ends up marrying Rebekah. Fast forward to where we are at. Isaac and Rebekah have two twins. Those twins are? Wow, it's like, I feel like middle school flashbacks this morning. Alrighty, I'm going to try that again. Isaac and Rebekah have twins, and their names are? Alrighty. Well, that was at least a couple more of you. The rest of you, you'll catch up. It is Esau and Jacob, or Jacob and Esau. Take either answer. Don't have to be in order. So Jacob and Esau. Now, Esau, and we did not talk about this, ends up marrying a Hittite woman and takes a Hittite woman as his wife. And this really displeases Isaac and Rebekah, because again, we remember in the family, they've been trying not to intermarry among the nations that are there. So Esau upsets his parents by taking this Hittite wife. Jacob, we know, ends up, through circumstances that you are very well familiar with, through tricking his brother, ends up having to run away. He ends up taking wives from among his kin. So Jacob does not marry into the Canaanites of the time. He goes back to Abraham's family, back to that lineage, and that's where both Leah and Rachel come from. Okay, I'm going to blank this one. This is bad. Rubbing off on me. All righty. Norman, please bring up my slide. So with that being said, let's talk about how this works. We are going to talk, I've entitled this day, Cheaper by the Dozen. And so Jacob will have 12 sons and a daughter. I'm sorry, but during this time, culture kind of is like the daughter was kind of an add-on, although she becomes very important to the story. So he has 13 children altogether. Norman, next slide. And Norman, you guys follow along with me. So we know that Leah and Rachel are his wives. He loved Rachel and tricked by Laban, and I had to kind of laugh kind of in the back, like, you know, how did he mix that up? I mean, it does, like, I know Pastor Jimmy said, well, maybe it was a little bit too much alcohol. I'm wondering, even with the veil, it's like, wow, but however that happened, he ends up with 2 wives. Now, here's where things get rough. He favors one. It's interesting when you read scriptures how many times favoritism is absolutely condemned. Whether we're talking about in the space of a family or whether we talk about it in the church. James, Jesus' brother, will write to the church and absolutely rail against them because they were showing favoritism to the rich and despising the poor. Favoritism never works out, nor does it do in this case. However, with these 2 wives, Leah is blessed. And Norman, go ahead. And she has a son named Reuben. And not only does she have a son, Reuben, following upon that, she has another son, Simeon. Following right along that, she has a son named Levi. And Norman, last one, and Judah. So 4 right in a row, 4 boys. And every time that she has a son, and you read in Genesis, her hope is that in having this son, that somehow she will get Jacob's love and affection that she does not have. And it becomes very obvious that Rachel's favored. Leah feels kind of put out, but God has blessed her with children, and she's hoping that Jacob will look and go, wow, you know what, you've given me sons, and he will love her as well. Meanwhile, Rachel has no children, and she's jealous. And so she takes a play out of Sarah's book, and she gives Jacob her handmaid, Bilhah. And the idea is that I'm going to give you my handmaid, and her children will be counted as mine. And so Bilhah is blessed and has a child. Number 5, Dan. And following right on that, she has another child named Naphtali. Well, not to be outdone, Norman, Leah's like, you want to play those kind of games, do you? And so Leah brings her handmaid to Jacob to give children, and that is Zilpah. And Zilpah is blessed with number 7, Gad, and Norman again, number 8, Asher. But amazingly, after that, God blesses Leah again, and it's a really interesting story. Reuben is out in the field, and he brings these mandrakes, and basically there's a deal that is struck between Leah and Rachel that Rachel wants her the fruit that Reuben has gotten, and she's like, well, then I get Jacob for me tonight. And in the course of that, she has another child, Issachar, number 9, and following right upon that, number 10, Zebulon. So, this is how it has worked out. Now, ultimately, as time goes on, God hears the cry of Rachel's heart, and he does give her a child, and number 11 will be born. Oh, sorry, Dina. Almost forgot to mention, she's important. There's also a daughter that's born, Dina. Keep her in mind. All right, Norman, next one. Number 11 will be Joseph, and then number 12 will be Benjamin. However, in the birth of Benjamin, tragedy will hit, and Rachel will actually die right after giving birth to Benjamin, and that will be the 12th child. So these are the 12 sons. Now, we talk about children and raising children, and it is not for the weak of heart, and you know that. I love my children; they are great. But the more I work on raising my own children, the more I realize how much I need God and how much wisdom I need. For those of you who are teachers as well, you get a little bit of feeling of this in the classroom. You know, you're looking at these kids and they need direction, and they're looking to you, and like, how do I direct them? How do I help them see the things they need to see? Well, let's talk about these children. Next slide. Alrighty. Simeon and Levi. So I'm going to give you the short version of this story. So Simeon and Levi are very two close brothers, and if you remember in the blessing, when Jacob blesses them, he actually blesses them together. And these two are kind of like, they're not twins, but they're like, those brothers that are very close. Well, there's a story that happens that there was a man by the name of Shechem that falls in love with Dinah, the daughter. And not only does he fall in love with her, again, this is a very evil culture, he rapes her. And after he rapes her, he demands, he wants to marry her. So he goes to Jacob and he says, look, he goes to his father first, Hamor, and he's like, look, I want this woman. That's fine, this might be a good thing. And so they go to Jacob and they say, look, we want your daughter. Okay. Now they know what's happened, and in the conversation it comes out that, all right, he has raped her, and as they are talking, the brothers find out about what has happened. Well, as they are discussing, and Hamor's like, hey, look, my son Shechem wants your daughter, why don't we just merge? You can give Dinah to us, we'll allow our daughters to marry into your children, and everything will be hunky-dory. Well, Simeon and Levi are sitting there and go, hey, we've got an idea. He's like, you know what, this will be a great idea, this is good. We like this idea, okay? But, we are circumcised. That is something that God has given to us, and it would be very evil of us if we kind of married into your families and you guys weren't circumcised. So here's the deal. All of your men get circumcised, and then, after that, we will allow you to marry Dinah and we'll take your wives. So Hamor and Shechem go back to the village, and of course you can imagine that this is kind of a rough request to ask, okay? It's like, all of you have to be circumcised. There's a little bit of greed in this because Hamor says, look, if we start intermarrying with them, look at all the flocks and herds they have. That's end up going to become ours. We're going to intermarry, and their wealth will come into our people. And people are like, yeah, this sounds good. So they all get circumcised. Then, while they are healing and weak, Simeon and Levi go into the village and they slaughter every last male. They kill them all. Then after they kill them all, they take their families and their livestock and they bring them back over with them. Okay? That's Simeon and Levi. I won't ask you how many have heard that story before. Okay? But when you hear in the blessing, and when it happens, Jacob finds out about this, and he's really stunned. He's like, what have you done? And later in the blessing that I read from you later, we find that he really talks about how this was evil. There were times, and it is true in the Old Testament, that God will command the Israelites to go in and slaughter an entire group of people. That is a thing. Okay? But there is always a purpose in it. Okay? There are times where there is a people whose evil is so great that God knows that they've got to be removed, or their corrupting influence will corrupt the people coming into the land. But there is a difference between that and out vengeance. God never endorses vengeance. Okay? We live in a world where war is an absolute part of our fallen world. And sometimes war is absolutely necessary. I think about, and I teach in my class, I teach about World War II. And I am so thankful that those men and women from all those allied countries went and stopped what Adolf Hitler was doing. It was necessary. And there are times when there is a corrupt power and a corrupt regime that needs to be put down. War. But in no terms is vengeance ever an option. And there's a difference. And I think that's a struggle for us. I know as Americans, we love the concept of vengeance is great. I mean, I remember after 9/11, okay, and I was one of the ones that I remember just the horror as those towers fell. And I remember thinking, man, we need to just go over there and nuke them until they glow and shoot them in the dark. And I was as mad as anybody else. But I began to think about it, and it's like, well, we can do that, but who's suffering? Who are the ones that we are killing? Okay, is it the ones that hurt us, or are we just over there bombing innocent civilians because we want vengeance for what's happened to us? Okay, again, I'm not talking about casting judgment on any political decision. What I'm saying is that in our lives, we really need to consider when we act, are we acting out of a sense of justice, or are we acting out of a sense of vengeance? And in this instance, again, I get it, okay? If this happened to one of my daughters, you can bet I would want to secretly borrow one of the plots from the church cemetery in order to use. Believe me, okay? But again, there is a difference between justice and vengeance, and them two absolutely cross the line. Well, you're like, well, you know what? Every family's got a couple children that kind of take things a little bit to the extreme. Certainly the other ones were great, right? Let's talk about the next one. Reuben in Genesis 35:22. In Genesis 35:22, as things are going along, Reuben ends up sleeping with Bilhah, his father's servant. You're like, that's nasty. You're right. And Jacob is furious about this. As a result of his action, he will lose the birthright. Reuben, if you notice, back from our chart at the beginning, he was Jacob's firstborn. He was the one that should have gotten the greatest blessing. But because of this evil that he did, he will be rejected from that blessing. Alrighty, let's talk about the next child. Joseph. Now, I'm not going to go through the story of Joseph. It would be a whole nother sermon. But many of you are familiar with the story from Sunday school. And you know that in the story of Joseph, Joseph's brothers hated him. Norman, next one. And the reason they hated him was because all of them were given a bad report by Joseph. Now, knowing Joseph's character, apparently this probably was true. Okay, they were probably doing, and we've already seen from 3 of them, okay, they probably not the most moral. And Joseph comes back to Jacob and tells them, well, they get very angry about this, and this really shows their character and how they handle the situation. I'm going to highlight 2 that are involved in the story of Joseph. First one. So when Joseph comes to his brothers, they decide that they are going to take vengeance on him. Again, this is very typical for them. We've seen that in Simeon and Levi. They decide that they're going to take vengeance on him. They first start by throwing him into a pit, which was Reuben's suggestion, because Reuben is already in trouble with dad. Okay, we already said he slept with one of his concubines, so he's already in a lot of trouble and really doesn't need to be estranged any further. So in Reuben's mind, he's going to try to save Joseph. I don't think it was a sense of a love for Joseph. You don't ever get that sense, but probably it was a sense of, hey, if I rescue him and bring him back to dad, maybe that will kind of patch things up a little bit. Interestingly, another brother comes into this, though, is Judah. I'm going to show you the character of how Judah is. So they have Joseph in a pit and are thinking about killing him, and Judah's like, wait, let's not kill him. Well, at least he loves Joseph enough, he doesn't want to see his brother dead. No. The question he poses to his brothers, like, if we kill him, we don't get anything out of it. We could sell him as a slave, and then we get rid of him and make money. Okay, so this is the type of personality we have in Judah. Judah's the one who suggested selling him. The other brothers are like, yeah, that makes sense. Let's sell him into slavery. Now again, we know that will work out towards Joseph's behalf. I want to bring out one more thing. Joseph shines out among his brothers. So far, I'm sure you're looking at like, wow, these are not the most moral of people. And it might be, you might be tempted to look at Jacob and go, man, what do you do raising these children? But interestingly, Joseph has a very different character. Because we're going to find that Joseph, after being sold into slavery, will go down into Egypt. And he will be in his master's house. And you can imagine, what if you were sold into slavery? Would you feel like God loved you or that you really need to care about this anymore? I'm sure Joseph was at the bottom of the barrel. He is a slave in a foreign land. God didn't deliver him out of that pit. Here he is. And while he's there, a very tempting offer comes his way. Potiphar, who was the man who he served, wife took an interest in Joseph to the point that she wanted to have an affair with him. He could have got away with it. Who's going to see? And certainly, who cares? Family wasn't around, and he was away from the land. But you see Joseph's character. Even though he's a slave, even though things have gone bad, he looks and he understands that God's law is like, no, you belong to another man, and it would be wrong, and it would be wrong with me to lay with you. And so we see this character in Joseph that we do not see in the other 11. And so I think that was a bright spot. Alrighty, next child. Let's talk about Judah. And again, the picture's already telling you this is not going to go well. So Judah, again, we've seen the character he has. He has a child And this child marries another Canaanite woman by the name of Tamar. And this child is absolutely evil. We are told that he is so evil, God strikes him dead. So apparently Judah's character deficiencies he is passing on to his children. Well, you think, well, that's just one child. So according to the law, if a husband dies, the brother is supposed to come to his brother's wife and have children so that that brother's name does not get erased. Well, the brother comes in and refuses to do his duty and refuses to have children with his brother's wife. God strikes him dead. Now, there's a third son. Now, he's still young, not to the marrying age yet. And so Judah goes to his daughter-in-law, to Tamar, and says, look, you wait, you keep pure, and when my third son comes of age, I will allow him to marry you. Judah doesn't. The boy grows up, and he pretty much ignores and acts like Tamar does not even exist. So, Tamar comes up with a plot. The fact that this plot, and this is what I want you to understand, the fact that this plot is going to work tells you a little bit about Judah. So Judah is going and he's going to go shear his sheep. And Tamar hears about this. So she dresses up as a temple prostitute and goes out. And when Judah comes by, he's like, all right. And off he goes with Tamar. So Judah ends up having a child with his daughter-in-law. I try not to laugh because sin is not funny, but you think about this, it's like, that is horrible. And the only defense he has is, it was an accident because she was dressed up. He did not realize he intended to be with a prostitute. But he ends up having relations with his daughter-in-law. And they end up having a child. Now, here's the interesting thing. You look at it, like this is Jerry Springer, for those of you who remember Jerry Springer. This is Jerry Springer level stuff, okay? But I think there's a really interesting lesson to come out of it. Because you would look at this and go, what is God bringing out of that? Well, interestingly, this daughter-in-law, Tamar, has twins. And one of those twins is a boy by the name of Perez. Do I hear about Perez? Perez ends up to be the ancestor of King David. So, and you know, if you take your mind a little bit further, Jesus is a descendant of David. And so this Tamar is actually in the line of the Messiah. And it's interesting that even through all the things, sometimes we kind of look at the world around us and we're tempted to look like, oh, what an ugly place this is. Sometimes we forget that even in the ugliness, God is still working his plan. And through this Jerry Springer type situation, God is continuing to work for the Messiah to come. Well, I'm going to stop there in talking about the children. And I hope that gives you a little bit of a glimpse. Again, I'm sure these are stories you're like, wow, I missed those in Sunday school. Okay? But if you take anything away, understand that one, beyond anything, God is at work. God is at work. And even when things seem like they're out of control, and we look at Jacob, and the theme has been one crazy family. We've kind of looked at the craziness in him, the craziness in his marriage. We see the craziness in his children. Yet God is going to take that family, and he's going to use them in a very mighty way. And I think that's encouragement for all of us, because I don't know about you, but there are days that I wake up, and I am tempted to look in the mirror and think about everything and all my failures and wonder, God, how are you going to use me today? And yet God, in his graciousness, it doesn't depend upon how good or what we do. It depends upon our faith in him and our willingness to let him use us. Let us pray. Father, we come to you this morning, and again, thank you for the stories that you give to us. Thank you for the challenge from your word. God, I do pray that this week, that in everything you do, you will continue to use us, broken as we are, that you will continue to fill us with your spirit, to give us the strength and power to do the things that even we think we cannot do. It's in your name we pray. Amen.